Hi and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 14 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge Me Made May. Like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. So, will you be taking any trips this year? There's no denying that travel in any form has an environmental impact to some degree. But how can we travel more sustainably? And how can sewing help us to do that? In this episode, Check Your Thread regular Shams Eldin Rogers and I discuss these topics and offer up heaps of suggestions that you can apply to your next trip. Whether you were a short city break kind of traveller like me, or you have a more adventurous trip planned to somewhere far-flung, like Shams. Are you doing okay today, listener? Have you been cracking on with any sewing or making since the last episode? I've decided to focus my sewing activities for the time being on using fabric scraps and leftovers. My scrap bins and bags are overflowing, and if I undertake any more projects that use a length of fabric, I'm only going to be making the situation worse. So I've been making some doll's clothes for my daughter and undies for me, and next up are some baby leggings and jersey hats for a friend who is pregnant. My goal isn't to rid myself completely of scraps, because they really are a useful resource, particularly for mending or when somebody urgently needs new undies or something. However, I just want to get it to all fit within the containers. If you've been using scraps in your sewing lately, I'd love to see or hear about it. I'm always looking for inspiration. If you care to share, please get in touch via email, zoe@checkyourthread, or on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks this week to Megan, Jen and Rachel, who signed up to support the podcast via the Patreon app this week. If you haven't already, please consider signing up like these awesome people have. It'll mean that I will be able to spend more time making this podcast better and even more inspiring and informative. It is ridiculously easy and quick to sign up. Just click on the link in the show notes or the episode description, whichever is showing up right now in your podcast app below the title of this episode. Thank you. As always, the full illustrated version of the show notes are available on the Check Your Thread website. And if you have any feedback on this or any other episode, I would love to hear. Right, safe travels and enjoy. So it is just but a few weeks since since I released our previous conversation about stashes and spaces, and that has had such a good response. Have you had any nice feedback about that one?
Yeah, and some people have written me and said, thank you. I needed to think about my possessions as resources instead of kind of a dirty word or something I needed to feel shame about or something.
Yeah.
So that is definitely something people have reached out and said. Some people just said, I just love you. I just want to hear you all the time.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? My mum actually messaged me yesterday saying that she was listening, she was catching up on some episodes, and she's saying that the Stashes and Spaces was the best one ever, and she loves you.
Oh, great. Big hug to your mom.
Oh, she says to say hello. She feels like she knows you now, having listened to you.
Good. I would like to meet her, and I want to hear about her opinions about your thrifty ways. Did you get them from her? Did she?
Maybe I'll get her on the podcast. That's a good question.
That's not a bad idea.
That's not a bad idea. I spoke about my grandparents quite a lot during the Make, Do and Mend episode. So
I remember.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I guess this one is, to some degree, one of my ideas of.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for collaborating with me again, and so soon since the last one came out. I know that people will be so excited to see you again.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be putting our heads together and get stuck into another complicated topic. This time, how sewing and sustainability relate to travel. So here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're coming into spring. So many people are going to be planning their trips around now for later in the year. I know that you and I have both got our travel plans set, so we'll discuss that a bit later as well. So travel as it relates to sustainability is, of course, a very thorny topic in its own right. And we know that pretty much all form of travel, apart from maybe like just walking, creates some kind of environmental impact and creates damage to a greater or lesser extent. Most forms of transport are reliant on fossil fuels, with long-haul flying being the most intensive. But this podcast, we are all about doing things more sustainably rather than the most sustainable. So we're not decreeing going on holiday or even taking a flight, but we want to acknowledge that there is an impact in that.
I think we have to think about not just is the flying bad, but is the moving our bodies about bad? Moving around costs energy, whether you use it in calories, whether you use it in solar, whether you're going to use fossil fuels, moving around is the problem. And so I think I also want to address that I need to check about driving, that flying isn't the biggest problem that I'm causing, driving is.
What is the train system like from where you are?
Pitiful. One time I wanted to go from Ann Arbor, Michigan to Detroit, Michigan, which is about a 40-minute drive, 45-minute drive. It took 8 hours on the train.
What?
It wasn't because of breakdowns, but in most of the U.S., the freight companies have priority on the train lines, except in the very crowded Northeast region where they have some rules that passenger trains have priority. If the freight trains need to go, it's their lines that the
Right.
Amtrak, the passenger trains are leasing. So you can enjoy. I've enjoyed a trip to California on the train. It took about 3 days to get there on the train. It's a beautiful trip. I've enjoyed it. The rail system is better in Canada than in the United States, but still it doesn't serve everywhere. Where it does serve is infrequent. And the train system is desired, but poor.
Right. Yeah. We're really lucky in the UK that it is very well connected by train, but since it's been privatised, it is so expensive. And they make it deliberately incredibly opaque how much something would be. So, for example, for myself to go to Edinburgh, I could fly and it would take a very short amount of time and it would probably cost me about maybe 60 quid. Or I could get the train, which would take about, I think it takes about 10 hours, but it'd be about 250 quid. So it's really frustrating because I think a lot of us would love to take more trips by the train, but it's just so prohibitive. They make it so difficult for most people to do that.
And I would say that the train, for example, to go from Michigan to go from Detroit or Ann Arbor to Chicago would have definitely and did take the train.
Right.
Driving is 5 hours, the train's 5 hours, but you don't have to
Right.
drive. Great. But on the recent trip, I had two different friends on the same trip who got delayed by 7 extra hours on the train because, again, of these problems with the freight trains and the passenger trains. And they were two different who didn't know each other, who happened to both be putting on Facebook, we're on this trip and the one guy's cat needed to pee. And, it's just a mess. So I don't think the barrier to train for most people in North America, well, in the United States, the train price and the air price are similar.
Right.
But you're going to spend 3 days or so on the train.
Yeah.
And you have to eat all the way. You have to either buy the train food or pack a whole lot of food.
Yeah.
In Canada, the prices of the trains, I understand, are higher than the planes, like you're saying,
Yeah.
like you're describing. I don't know all the details about that. So it's a problem. It's a problem.
It is a real problem, yeah. And it's not in anyone's interest necessarily to invest in the infrastructure for creating these train lines when to be cheaper wouldn't make sense for them, would it? To make it cheaper than the existing forms of
Well,
transport.
what do countries want? They want in the long term to be good for their citizens. But in the short term, at least in these countries, the people who are making the decisions have to be elected and reelected.
Yeah.
So the long-term good would be to say there's greenhouse gases. Our planet is heating. We're having climate disasters. What should we do? Oh, let's make it easier for people to live their lives with less of an impact on the environment. But that has a long-term payoff. The election is next year.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's not in their interest. I just think it's only in their long-term interest, and that they are not thinking for the long term.
Absolutely. but we're all about being more sustainable
Hmm.
rather than most sustainable. So we are going to be traveling, both of us, aren't
Hmm.
we, this
Hmm.
year? We've got our plans and we're going to do the best we can to offset the impact of those things. So tell me about your plans this year, Shams.
So in July and August, I plan to go to Tanzania with my friend.
Amazing.
And I hope while there to have a little chance to visit Uganda and Kenya as well.
Is that an area of the world you've been to before?
No, not at all, but I have some people and connections in each of those areas, so I'd like to check them out. My husband plans to come and meet me near the end of my trip in Tanzania, and then we stop in some other country on the way back. And I want to say that as a handicapped person, so he's blind, or some people call it visually impaired, it's tough to travel in some poorer countries. The infrastructure isn't there for him to be independent and enjoy his trip. Whereas if we stop in Amsterdam or we stop in London or Paris or something, he has a lot more choices about what he can do without me taking him and holding him by the hand, because it's very unlikely that he's going to fall into an open sewer, for example. So we'll stop in Europe probably on the way back.
Okay, well, please let me know if it's London.
Okay, I surely would.
Awesome. That's amazing. I have 2 trips planned for this year. Speaking of train, my family and I are going to go to the Netherlands for a week at Easter because I'm trying to avoid short haul flight. So I've actually booked the Eurostar going from London to Amsterdam. And because I booked it a long time ago, it was actually probably comparable to the price of flying for all 4 of us. And it actually only takes like 4 hours or 4.5 hours from London to Amsterdam, which is really cool. So doing that. And then in the summer, we've booked a holiday within the UK to like a little seaside place in Norfolk. We don't have a car, but I'm going to hire a car because where we want to be isn't very connected to rail travel, and also because it's quite sparsely populated and the towns and villages are quite far between. It's going to be easier to have a car for the week that we're there to go and visit those places. So yeah, so these are the trips that we've got planned. Very exciting.
Wait, I have one more. I forgot.
Oh,
I only told about the summer. In October, I plan to drive from Toronto through Michigan and Alabama, which is a long way for listeners around the world, then the state of Georgia, and then to Vermont.
wow.
And so it takes about 4 days to go from Toronto to Georgia, but I'll be stopping in each of those places I mentioned to visit an elderly aunt or my elderly mom.
Oh, wonderful.
And on the way back through Vermont again, to Vermont, I'll stop again. So I'm going to make a circuit of the elderly female
Oh, I
relatives,
love that.
and that will take most of a month.
Right. Road trip. Amazing. Are you going to be taking your camper van for that trip?
Yes, I am.
So can you stay in it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I definitely stay in it outside of each of the different relatives' house. Then I don't have to deal with cat allergies. I have my own bed and my own sheets, and everything is according to my needs there. I plug into their house electricity
Right.
if it's close enough. If not, I can just go off the batteries in the van.
Awesome. So those are our travel plans. But now let's talk about what we can prepare, pack, and make indeed, so that we can be more sustainable as we're traveling and also get some enjoyment with sewing. So let's start with luggage. So what kinds of luggage do you think you'll be taking?
I bought about 30 years ago now, I bought luggage with a lifetime warranty.
Amazing.
And that also is resistant to slicing.
Right.
It's called ballistic nylon. Because I have been at the airport looking at the carousel where people's luggage was arriving and their luggage has been sliced. I've seen that at the airport in Cairo and at the airport in Casablanca. And stuff is everywhere, and private stuff is falling all out, and whatever was in there that was of value is stolen. So I saw that young. So I bought this ballistic nylon luggage, and you actually can't stab it or cut it, and you can't sew it at home. Also, doesn't develop a hole. So over the years, I've sent it back a few times when a wheel was busted or the zipper needed attention. And so they've sent it back. And so I've got a set of 5 of that. And I've been using them all these years. It's kind of a buy it for life
That's
situation.
fantastic.
I would advise anybody who lives the kind of life that I've lived with traveling internationally on a regular basis and to places where it can be a little bit dodgy sometimes, to decide what you're going to prioritize, because it does cost much more money and that stuff isn't going to compost.
Yeah.
But it hasn't had to. 30 years, the stuff's been fine.
Yeah. So you got like a set of like different sizes for your different requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Do they kind of go into each other like a kind of babushka doll kind of thing?
If you nest them all, you will still have 2 big ones.
Right. Potentially you could make some luggage, couldn't you, if you were if you didn't require anything that was quite so solid.
I bought those things I was so young
Right.
that I didn't need to. I've made backpacks.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't talk about your luggage first.
Oh, my luggage. I have one medium to small size suitcase that I bought about 20 years ago in a supermarket. It's like a hard shell one, but really poor quality, but somehow it still lasted. And then for my needs, I haven't really needed many other things. When you take trips to the like EasyJet and Ryanair, those kind of European based airlines, they've got very strict rules with certain sizes, and they kind of sting you for extra money for the slightly different sizes. You have to be super aware of that airline for that trip, that what you've paid for is the right size. So I often borrow suitcases from friends because, for one, we've talked about as well with the stashes and spaces, I don't have a lot of storage space, and my suitcase that I have, the hard shell one that I told you about, that actually stores quite a lot of fabric and stuff. So for going on shorter, like a weekend trip or whatever, I often borrow a suitcase because it's not something that I need all the time. However, more recently, I actually went on Free Cycle and requested a suitcase, like a small kind of carry-on suitcase, and I got one. It's not going to be suitable for every trip that I want to make, but it's given me another option. And then a lot of the times I feel like just like a big bag, like a big rucksack, can often do for some of the trips as well. And I actually personally, I don't tend to use a handbag either in my day-to-day life or when I go on a trip. I prefer a backpack because then you've got both hands free, especially since having kids. So I really like backpacks as an option as well. My one that I use all the time at the moment, I use the Raspberry Rucksack pattern by Sarah Kirsten. That's really good. And I've actually got my eye out on lots of patterns by Noodlehead as well, because I've used one of their patterns before for a rucksack. It was really good. And they've got loads of ones that look like they could be really useful for travel, like kind of sling bags, and I'm keeping my eyes out for those maybe. But obviously we're doing Last Sarah Standing at the moment, so I'm not going to be buying any patterns for a while.
Well, when I wanted to make a backpack, I was in South Korea and I didn't have access to all these patterns. There were downloadable patterns, but they weren't like they are today. But I just went and borrowed a backpack from a colleague for the weekend and then copied his backpack exactly in size and shape and every dimension. And I went out and bought straps and hardware there in South Korea, gave him back his backpack. I really like the backpack when I'm traveling and out walking because I don't walk very well. I use 2 canes, or cane in each hand, so I can carry things with me in a backpack. But for making travel goods, I also want to go back to your great idea about borrowing. And there's also so much in the used stores, at least where I am. There, I don't buy them because I already have, as we discussed, but I see used bags of many shapes and sizes in these stores. So I would like to remind people that you don't have to own it. And you can also, if you want, donate it back to the store.
Absolutely.
If you don't have the space.
That's such a good point. Funnily enough, I went to there's a big charity shop called Emmaus that's near where we live. We went there yesterday and they actually had like a sale on, reduced price on all this luggage. And it was wild, all the different types of luggage. So,
but there's also, as you talked about, so many things that go inside the luggage.
Yes.
And I just 2 days ago made and put on Instagram, my husband was saying he needed some smaller bags to divide his items as far as t-shirts or socks or things into smaller sub bags. And I'd like to mention that that's a great opportunity to use scraps and leftovers. It's also great when you can use your polyester, because polyester is a bad thing, people. If polyester breaks down into little microfibers, which are little tiny bits of plastic, then the aquatic animals are eating that, the fish are eating that, the other animals are eating it. People are being born with plastic in their bloodstreams. And one thing we can do to reduce that is to reduce the use of plastics of every sort, and polyester is one of them. So if you have some polyester in your life and you use it to make these small accessories that go into your luggage, those things don't get washed very often. And I know, Zoe, you've mentioned things like sunglasses cases and iPad cases, and I don't know what else, toiletry bags, all these kinds of things that you could make for your trip. You could use your scraps and leftovers. You can even patchwork them. You could use your polyester, and you can really make them an opportunity to avoid waste and avoid polluting the environment. If I don't suggest buying any polyester, I'm saying if you already had some that somehow snuck into your world.
Absolutely, because there's so many things, isn't there, that, as you say, you could make that you don't necessarily need to launder. So, for example, like those bags that you were making for your husband, that's his clean clothes going there, isn't it? It's not like the dirty laundry thing. So it itself doesn't need to go through the wash. And there are so many things you can make, as you say, like toiletry cases, purses, iPad cases, or something to hold your technology. I was also thinking about like cutlery rolls, so you could take your own reusable cutlery and straws and take that with you, so when you're out and about picnics and stuff, you don't need to take disposable cutlery. Things that hold water bottles or reusable coffee cups or travel notebooks, all sorts of things that you can make that contain your items, help you eat more easily as well. So that's something I would really like to make, actually, for my forthcoming trips, a way to be a bit more organized and a way to use up scraps as well, as you say. I actually found a really nice list of 40 free zip pouch tutorials. The blog post was made by Polka Dot Chair, and I'll put that in the show notes because there's some really cool options in different shapes and sizes and volumes and stuff. Right, so what about clothing?
Well, let's talk about clothing then. So I think that when you go on a trip, you have to consider the physical climate. Is it warm? Is it cold? Is there air conditioning? Is there heating? You also have to consider the cultural and social climate and the expectations for your trip.
Yeah.
So if you're traveling with your kids, it's not the same as if you're traveling to go to business meetings most of the time. So you would pack differently for those different trips. I often go to cultures where there's a less of a range of acceptable clothing compared to North America.
Right.
So they may have expectations for women that would be different from what the expectations are in North America. They may have also expectations for men. So, for example, if you're traveling to Egypt, adult men don't wear shorts.
Right.
And it is offensive if you go into mosques or churches wearing shorts. And you're like, but these are long shorts. Look, they don't want to hear about your opinions about what you should do. They have a list of things that are their expectations. So the first thing I think before you go is you have to consider what the physical and cultural expectations will be for your trip.
So are you going to be packing certain items that maybe you wouldn't be wearing in North America for your forthcoming trip?
I wear what a lot of Muslims would call modest clothes regularly. So most of my clothing would be covering what needs to be covered. Depending on the country, I would add a headscarf, but sometimes I add a headscarf here. The difference is I would narrow my choices.
Right.
So when we go to Tanzania, it's warm. So I will be carrying mostly cottons, blouses with sleeves to the elbow, and I'll be wearing mostly skirt type things or wrap things over my skirts. So it's not that I have to bring something special from my particular wardrobe.
Yeah. So to cope with climate fluctuations and temperature fluctuations, do you tend to layer, or do you have any strategies with that?
I definitely tend to layer. I also bring a wrap depending on where I'm going. It's usually a lightweight wool, even if it's a warm country, because you could be on the plane or you could be in a a building, sometimes they air condition those places. You're
Yeah.
thinking, are y'all thinking that the people outside are coming from Alaska? What is this? So I usually bring a wrap that I can put on in various ways of putting it on. And layers, again, I also don't go too many places where it's miserable there, where it's miserably cold is my explanation of miserable. But if I do, and I have a real important tip, people, if you never heard a tip from me before, when you are traveling, if you are driving, make sure you have extra boots in the car, extra warm things in the car. If your car breaks down, we had a friend, she fortunately lived through it, but barely.
Really?
Her car broke down 3 miles from her house in Vermont in the winter. She was found in the morning with lungs full of mud, having fallen out of her car, having
Oh
sucked
God.
mud. If we can keep an emergency kit in our car, and she wasn't to blame. She even had a suitcase. It was, I mean, a sleeping bag. It was full of mud when they found her.
Wow.
Keep as many emergency supplies in the car as is safe to do, because you really want to say, when I'm traveling, what could be an emergency in that area?
Mm.
So not just the clothes, but I have a small water purifier, a life straw in the bag, a small flashlight in the bag. You just
Yeah.
don't know. So more than the clothing, I think there are some items that I take with me
Right.
in case of emergency of climate. And another tip, and this is Shumps is out here giving tips, when you go someplace, you can register with your local consulate of your country, and you
Mm.
can tell them, I'm staying in this hotel, I'm a citizen of your country. If there's an emergency, they know where to find you in case there's an earthquake, tsunami, and so forth. Again, these are climate questions, which are getting worse, not better,
Yeah.
because of human activity. But that's a way to be prepared for emergencies. Now, I don't want to veer too far from sewing, so I'll stay on. But those are my big tips.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that you could do that. Yeah, that's really interesting. Will you be doing that when you go on your trip?
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't do it if I'm going to Paris. Plus, there's so many Americans that if there's a problem in Paris, they can't find all of us. No way. But if I'm in countries where presumably communications could easily be broken down in an emergency, I absolutely do. So anyway, what are you packing differently, or what are you packing for your
What
trip?
am I packing? My strategy is, because I'm going to be sharing a suitcase with my
Mm,
kids, I'm going to be packing as little as possible, wearing as much of it as possible, literally to get there.
mhm.
All about the layers. I find that mix and matchable separates for me works better, because then if you find yourself you're too hot or you find yourself you're too chilly, I find it's much easier. Plus, also, you can make more outfits out of what you've got, so you can at least feel like you're looking a bit different, even though you've maybe only taken 2 pairs of trousers and 3 tops. If you can mix and match them, you feel like you're not wearing exactly the same thing day in, day out. Plus, also, just for practical things, tend to go for darker colours, because if you drop your coffee or whatever down you, that's not going to show up quite so well, because, I mean, generally the holidays I go on, they're kind of shorter. You don't necessarily have access to washing facilities. And I also like to usually take one nice outfit. So if we go for like a nice meal or 2 nice meals, I've got like a nice dress or jumpsuit, preferably doesn't need ironing, And I think that's a nice way to go. And I always just take 2 pairs of footwear with me, just in case one breaks. It's never happened to me, but if I lost one or something like that, or I trod in a puddle and one of them became soaking, I think it's good to have two pairs. So I try and err on the kind of smaller side, but kind of mix things up. That's my personal strategy anyway.
One thing I think is nice is your reusable menstrual pads when you go on a trip of a longer duration. It really saves you from having to carry so many pads. Some countries, the pads or tampons are not to the standard of maybe the country you came from. Also, the size choice may not be available. So when I first went to Egypt when I was 19 years old, I had pads. I had a package of Always for each month decanted into Ziplocs, and I had them all with me. But later, when I learned about reusable pads and I would travel with reusable pads, then I only have to carry the equivalent of one package, and then I can wash those when I am in the country. So depending on whether it's a long trip or a short trip, I think for 5 days with the Eurostar and the kids, you're not going to want to take the reusable, what did you call them? The period pants, you referred to them as.
Yeah.
You may not want to take those. You might want to use disposables. I still keep one or two disposables in my luggage. You never, especially as you're getting in the menopause, which I'm in the menopause now, you don't know when the bleeding is going to come.
Right.
So I definitely keep a couple just
Yeah.
in case. I also suggest when we're talking about washing, I take washing soap, laundry soap, which in North America there are several different brands. Plus, if you go to certain smaller ethnic stores, they'll have soap intending for you to wash clothes by hand. So I cut some of the bar of it so that I don't have to take a whole heavy bar.
That's such a good idea.
And then when I'm in the hotel, I'm not talking about menstruation, I'm just talking about it regularly. When I'm in the hotel, I just go ahead and wash those panties. I wash that slip. I wash those socks. The outer clothes usually don't need that much washing if you keep the inner clothes clean. And I also take a lot of showers when traveling so that my clothes don't get as dirty. So by doing that, I reduce weight and I don't have to bring as many clothes.
That's a really good idea. I'm going to keep an eye out for that. That's a really good tip.
Okay. I see that you and your family sometimes need something specific for a trip. Is there anything specific you need for this trip that you need to make?
Sun hats.
Okay.
Every year I make them a sun hat, and either they've lost one or their head has got bigger. And then I feel like I'm making at least 3 sun hats every year. So,
wow.
But it's a good scrap busting thing. It's a really good, you can often cut the pieces out of weird shapes and stuff. Denim's really good. I like using quite durable fabric like denim or twill or something like that. So for me this year, as well as making some little pouches and stuff to keep things more organized, I'm also going to be making a load of sun hats. But yeah, maybe just 2.
I don't need to make anything for this trip in particular, but I'm going to keep making travel bags to segregate my husband's things in his luggage. I plan to make some more of the cases and bags to use in my van that help organize the assortment of things that one takes in the van. And then a sewing kit. I plan to assemble a sewing kit to take.
So is that for repairs and emergencies?
I have 2 kinds of kits. One that I'm saying needs to be revamped is for if there's an emergency. Just a little small one, and it has needles, thread, just a few, hand needles, hand thread, a thimble, a couple colors, little scissors. So that's just in case of emergency. But I'm also taking, when going on longer trips, I take something bigger in case I want to make something, in case I either, and I know we're going to talk about sewing machines later, but in case I need to make something, what are the things I always need? To just have a few things that if I found some fabric and wanted to make a thing, what would I need?
That references a couple of conversations I had previously for the podcast with Louisa Owen Sonstrom and Alexis Bailey, both who are big fans of hand sewing and have both discussed the benefits of hand sewing for, as you say, for when you go on travel. It's a way to keep creative, to stay making, a great thing that you can do in your evenings, in your, your accommodation or something. So you're going to have anything else?
Well, I always need a little knitting. Because sometimes you can be knitting a sock or something small while riding on a bus or anything jolty that you wouldn't want to be trying to sew on. So I always have a little travel knitting. If I really think I'm going to be having a lot of opportunity to sit down, I will bring a piece of fabric with waistcloth already pasted where I want, or already basted on where I want the embroidery to be. And then I will embroider onto the waistcloth, onto the fabric, or I will have used an iron-on transfer or another transfer method before leaving so that I can do that in the other location. I rarely ever sew a garment or accessory with hand. It mostly would be hemming or trying to borrow or buy a machine, depending on how long I'm going to be in the place. Or I may have brought one, depending on, again, how long I'm going to be in the place.
So have you gone on trips where you've brought your machine with you?
Absolutely. I've done this domestically and internationally. So
Really?
when I needed to fly to San Francisco to take an advanced class for teachers, I then brought a sewing machine and a serger.
Really? How long were you away from home for that trip?
A month,
Right.
because during the downtime while I was there, I wanted to enjoy making some clothes. I'd been in that part of the country several times before. I knew I wasn't going to be out there touristing. I was going to be going to the classes or studying the readings assigned to the teachers or kind of just living. So I brought along a sewing machine and a serger. I have carry-ons that of the 5 suitcases that I have one that fits a sewing machine and one that fits a serger. So I had those things padded with clothes in the carry-ons, and the serger was my personal item, and the sewing machine was my carry-on.
Right, so they weren't chucked into the hold.
No, people who travel with their sewing machines in the hold of the plane, in the cargo compartment or the baggage compartment, go ahead and keep your original box from
Right.
your original sewing machine with your styrofoam and whatnot. Or if you don't have it, sometimes your local sewing machine shop will have one available to sell you, or you could go on that free cycle. Maybe somebody can lend you one with a similar shape. Because if you're going to check it, it needs all of that protection, and it needs those
Absolutely.
tags to say fragile, handle with care. I would also only use that for a metal body, which are heavy, but I wouldn't put a plastic or certainly not a computerized sewing machine in the hold of the plane.
Right.
So I've also traveled with those machines, those same serger and sewing machine, to Abu Dhabi, where I taught for 2 years, and then South Korea, where I taught for 2 years. Now, I want to say sewing machines are electric and they are responsive to the environment where they're sold. So we use 110, 120. In the United States, they use 220, 240 in those 2 countries. Some people think, okay, all I have to do is put a plug adapter and I'll change it. Just like many computers, they say right on there 110 to 240, and you really only do have to change the plug. Your sewing machine is almost certainly not that way.
Oh,
You need what's called a step up or a step down transformer, depending on which direction you're going. If I'm coming from a 110 country, I'm going to a 120 country, I need them to step down that 240 current so my machine doesn't get 240. If you came, aren't you guys a 240 country?
don't know.
Okay. If someone came from, I know for sure if they came from Germany to the US, they would use a step up converter so that what comes out of the wall gets raised to the level that their machine will accept.
Right.
I have a device that is called a step up, step down converter. So depending on where you're going, you could use it either way. And it's heavy and about the size of a shoebox, or maybe a little smaller than a shoebox, but far heavier than a shoebox. Do not think, oh, if it's small and it weighs something like 2 apples, that ain't it. You're going to fry your machine. So I knew that when I first went to Abu Dhabi, I went and bought my step up, step down converter as soon as I got there. And now I use it when I go to countries like that. So when I took it to Korea, I took that with me.
That is very good advice. I've never taken my machine on holiday with me. I got it sent over when I lived in Spain. Thankfully, it seems that the power is the same in UK and Spain because I didn't have any problems.
But you had to transfer from that big UK 3-prong to the European small
Yes,
2-prong. That's
yes.
all
So
you had to do. Right.
I've got loads of those for like when I took my hairdryer and my phone charger and all those. Yeah, we've got
Hmm.
lots of those from back and forth. Yeah.
So I think we just talked about travel. You travel mostly, it's a holiday.
Apart from when I lived in Spain. Yeah.
And most of my life, the traveling hasn't been holiday. It's been studying or working.
Yeah.
So that will make a difference into whether it's worth it to bring a machine.
Absolutely, yeah. If you're taking your life somewhere for a while, then
Right.
you need your things, you need your pastimes and the things that bring you joy.
So I have been thinking that perhaps in the summer that I would buy a machine in Tanzania and
Ah.
donate it to an organization that deals with sewing when it's time to go. I'm not sure yet if I want to do that. I also might be able to make a deal with an organization that I could go there and do some sewing, or I might be too busy.
Interesting. So, I mean, so sewing when you go away, if you're going away for a long enough time, is one way to engage with sewing as part of your trip. But there's lots of other ways, even isn't there, that are
Sure.
maybe more applicable for when you're going for a shorter period of time. So, for example, I personally really love to do this, and it's part of my planning for my trip. I like to find out if there are any local sewing or fabric shops in the location that I'm going, and I make sure that I make it part of the itinerary of when we're going to go out and have a day. So, have you been doing any research like that for your trip this summer?
Well, when I went to Amsterdam, I enjoy doing some of that research. And there's some great shops for haberdashery and also for bra making materials and also
Ah,
fabrics as a whole. So in the Netherlands in particular, I remember spending many glorious hours out there shopping and also some patterns that they have that are not necessarily as widely available. And they have some pattern magazines such as Knip Mode. So I've been doing a lot of research about what clothing is available in Tanzania. And also, I got that kind of brain. So I always research a thing into a hole in the ground. One thing is that there isn't very much hobby sewing.
right.
In a poor country, and many people are still not only poor, but really desperately poor. But even in a lower middle income country, owning your own sewing machine and having a hobby of sewing and all the paraphernalia with it is just not feasible.
Yeah.
So there are sewing machine hobbyists, mostly in Dar es Salaam, in the capital, but for the most part, that's not the way sewing is running. Sewing is a business. If you buy fabric, you think of taking it to the tailor to
Right.
have it rendered into clothing. And a lot of the fabric is manufactured somewhere else.
Uh-huh.
So Tanzania grows a lot of cotton, but over the history of how the country was colonized and has set itself free, patterns of buying cotton from India, which all they have to do is go across an ocean, buying cotton from India, buying fabrics that are made in India, not just the raw cotton, and that are processed in India have become a larger part of the lifestyle of the people there. So the most common garment for women, called the kanga, is often imported from India. But you can also buy there are a few Tanzanian manufacturers of that. So I would like to learn more about that, and maybe I can take a factory tour or something. And about my fabric challenge here. I'm participating in the last sew is standing, and you are
Yeah.
too.
I know this is really going to put us to the test, isn't it, our trips?
Yeah, this is going to be a test, but I have a plan. I posted about this today on my Instagram. So my plan is I've packed up a box of 9 yards of fabric to send to my friend who's going to Tanzania with me. So I can trade with them. And when we are there, they can buy me some of the local kanga fabric.
Right. So to clarify, your friend you're going with is a sewer, and you have given, or the first half of the trade, some fabric from your stash that you've owned for a while that they are then going to use. And they've also, if I forgot this right, they've already seen the fabric. They've selected pieces that they know that they will use.
From pictures, yes, I sent them pictures.
Amazing. So you know that that's going to be used. You know that it's got a life, and then the other half is that they will then buy fabric in Tanzania to the equivalent volume, perhaps.
The
Or
equivalent, the equivalent yardage, because the
right.
volume would be the fabrics that they're using in Tanzania are thinner,
Yeah.
so the volume will be less. And far from the equivalent dollar value, I discovered that for $4 you get the two pieces of kanga, which is so you're getting about 2 meters by 1.5 meters for $4 US. And the fabric that I sent them was clearly not 2 meters for $4. It was not $2 a meter fabric. But the goal is to reduce the sewing resources at my house, so I will have less volume after this trade.
Brilliant. And you also get to enjoy the textiles from the country that you're traveling to.
Yeah, and I can stay in the running for last
I
sewish
love this.
standing at least. I sent a note to Miss Tashley to say, can I still stay in if I do this? But the gamification of the idea of let's reduce our stash can't stop the real goal, which is if we just chose to go to a country and just say we allocated $100 for fabric, that's 25 pieces of that local thing. Do I need 25 new outfits? Clearly not. So I think there has to be some method, whether it's a game or whatever, there has to be some method to have restraint.
Sure.
Do you have a restraint plan for how to keep yourself out of the...
I am not going to go in any fabric shops. I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to even tempt myself.
We talked about having things made in a country. So on your trip, I don't know if you're there long enough to have anything made.
No, and I don't think I would, because I like to only wear things I've made myself.
I like to only wear things that I've made myself or that I thrifted or that I could meet the people who did the making.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of times if people go to Hong Kong, for example, they can order a suit there and it can get back to you at their hotel in 3 days. And you can meet the people. I'm not going to Hong Kong. I don't need a suit. But I mean that would meet my standards for accepting clothing. I usually go, as I said, for longer. And that kind of diminishes the impact of the air travel. If you go less frequently but for longer, you are not zipping and zapping all around. Yeah. And so while I'm there, it's been my practice the last few times to take with me a suitcase full of fabric and the threads, the elastics, the buttons, and have things made in the country that I'm going to. I've been losing weight. I've talked to my followers about the fact I've been losing weight, and my clothes are not fitting. So going to these other countries and this time having some things made that will be smaller will allow me to leave some of the things that I've brought that are still in good condition because I take good care of my clothes and give those to some women in that country, in this case Tanzania, who could be bigger and in need of some of the kinds of clothes that I had. So you would say, well, why are you bringing all the threads? Why are you bringing all the zippers, the buttons? Every country will have a market where you can buy those kinds of things, but the quality of those may differ. So that's my plan, and I've already started to think about what's going, what's not going, and maybe I'll bring a few extra pieces for my friend as well. But when working with people in countries who are going to sew your clothes, I always suggest that you order only one first.
Right.
And don't ask for things that fall outside of their regular cultural idiom for design. So if they currently make hanbok in Korea, order hanbok. If they make traditional Egyptian galabiya, or if in Romania they make a very European style clothes, then don't ask them to make your galabiya because they don't really know how to do these things that fit outside of their idiom and things get funky. So make only variations on the shapes that they normally make.
Right. Top tip. So what are you planning?
I'm planning on replacing some of my salwar kameez.
Right. What is that?
It is an item that you see a lot of women from South India or from anyway South Asia wearing. Also in Pakistan, Bangladesh, it's the loose trousers that may be tight at the ankle and a tunic top that goes to close to the knee or maybe partially up the thigh. And then there's a dupatta, which is a scarf that goes with it that's wrapped around the head and upper body or draped depending on the person's preference or culture. So that's something that a lot of American Muslim women can wear when we want. So here's the thing. We don't have a folk garment as American Muslims. we don't have something where you could say, oh, they always wear their jibba or whatever. So most of us borrow from other mostly Muslim cultures
Right.
around the world. So salwar kameez is something that I've been wearing now, since my 20s. I don't wear salwar kameez every day, but I wear it any day I feel like wearing it. It's just normal clothes to me. And I understand that they make those in Tanzania
Right.
and that can be bought. I also understand that they make kaftans, and I've looked up a couple of shops that actually will make them for customers to order. So, again, I'm not trying to get funny with them. You make kaftans, I'll bring you some fabric to make some kaftans. Maybe a little longer sleeve here, but make the thing you already make. So I'm planning salwar kameez and kaftans for the most part.
Brilliant. And you've got fabric selected in mind for those?
I'm still working all of them, but some of them. And the bad thing is, Zoe, and I know that your listeners will say, well, how you got a suitcase full of extra fabric to just take? I'm like, y'all have no idea. Y'all have no idea. And then my plan is to leave some of the larger salwar kameez and kaftans over there. Now, one thing that I wanted to add about the taking fabric with you to have made is make sure you have some way to prove to customs in your own country that you took that fabric out with you.
Oh, really?
Because when you're coming back to your country, they may want to charge you duty on all of these items. If you
Oh,
can show you've saved on your phone, they may not ask you, but you've saved on your phone your receipts from some of these fabric companies that you bought all this crap from in the first place. Then if they're asking you, you can say, I took the fabric with me, this is the fabric, and I paid this other amount, this lower amount, to have it turned into clothes.
right. And you don't have to pay the duties. Oh, I didn't know that. Have you got stung before with duties for things that you've brought
No,
back in?
because I mind all P's and all Q's, and you have camera equipment, you have the receipt. I have all that stuff. So
Yeah, but
before
you've
we
got the
had
foresight to even use those things that I clearly wouldn't have.
before they had the cell phones, I would even have paper receipts for the more expensive for the laptop. You just don't want any mess.
Well, it's good to have as well if you've got travel insurance. It's good to have all those things for that as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I want to also point out that when you and I travel, it's different in another way too, is that I'm always black every time I'm traveling. And some people in the world have created an idea that black people are criminals or in some way bad.
Right.
So when I have to cross a border, including the border back into my own country, they may be thinking we don't like black people or black people are bad. So we're going to make sure that this particular black woman is not doing the bad thing. We're going to go all the way through her luggage. We're going to verify everything. So I have made a life of traveling and moving around the world and living and so on. And when they ask me for things, I'm already ready because I'm also afraid, what if I got taken into custody? In this
Right.
country, you can wind up dead. So I have everything. And so when I come back into Canada, for example, I live in the United States and Canada. When I come back into Canada, they're asking for my paperwork. I've got it. Recently, someone said, where's your husband? I said, he's already in Canada. They said, do you have a marriage license? I said, yes, actually, right in this folder, I've got a marriage license. It's a copy, but the courthouse is open. You could call
Wow.
because I'm ready for that.
Right.
Because that happens. And when I cross the border at St. Albans in Vermont, and I go across, I see the Canadian police have stopped several people and are going through their stuff. It's always people of color.
Is it?
Always. They're going through I don't mean they grab all people of color. I do not mean that. I
Uh-huh.
mean that somehow everyone they grab is people of color.
Right. What a coincidence.
What a coincidence. And people I know in Michigan have talked about problems, and I have had occasionally problems with the U.S. coming back. Social justice is very important. And these taxes that we pay living as minorities in these societies, I know that Arabs living in France, have talked about some of the same things. So you wouldn't have to know to prepare for all that because they probably would be nice to you and let you go.
Right.
And they might, and they some very frequently are nice to me. But on another occasion, I was coming into the U.S. to my own country, remember, from my location in Toronto, so about 3.5 hours to get to Michigan. I needed to turn a piece of paper in at a university, and then I was just going to go back to Toronto, so I didn't have any luggage. My car was empty, and I'm coming into my own country, and the guy's querying me, why, where have you been? Why are you coming? And I explained. He said, well, you don't have any luggage? I said, yeah, I'm just going to give this piece of paper to the university. It can't be faxed. I have to actually bring it, and then I'll go back to Toronto. You know, the man demanded to see the papers, and then he read the papers.
What? That's so offensive.
It's so offensive, and it is so part of our life that we're always prepared for that.
Right.
Or we're not going anywhere. The Black people, the Asian minorities in these countries, the Arab people, the whatever, if they don't have their papers right, they're not the Black folks you met because they're still wherever they were. When we talk about travel and moving around, they have a phenomenon called traveling while Black.
Right.
And so I do that. So yeah, I have all my documents.
So you've got to have all those layers. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to cry. You always make me cry.
No, God. So every time we have a meeting, every time we have a podcast, we cry. But
I just hate that you have to experience that, have to think about those things. And I don't.
I barely even think about it anymore. But I think that there's reason to be upset. But I can't even be upset every day. I just have to be prepared and have all my papers. And I always have all my papers so that there doesn't have to be Sandra Bland, dying in police custody some kind of way. So, or rejected and sent back. When we talk about the impact of tourism too, if you're going someplace and you start to learn about the local people, start to take a little class in some aspect of their culture, such as a batik class, or you're taking a weaving class, or a class in natural dyeing, or whatever. Those are the kinds of classes that I'm interested in. But whatever it is, if you like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, if you go over there and get involved with the jiu-jitsu team in the country, I think this kind of traveling and actually doing things with people who are there could help to reduce these kinds of stereotypes and assumptions that are prevalent when people don't know each other. Now, it's not enough just to go and sit on the beach in the country, but to talk to people and, if possible, to have learned some of their language before going, to be able to say a few things to them. I know you can't always learn the whole language, but these kinds of things, I hope, will reduce prejudice if you let them. If you want to come back as a person of the world instead of just a person of your country who traveled abroad.
Who's got a bit of a tan, yeah.
Yeah.
I hope you have an amazing trip. I cannot wait to see the kanga that you come back with, the garments. It's so exciting.
I'm looking forward to it too.
I was going to say, I feel so privileged that I'm able to take my kids to. Last year they went to Italy, and this year they're going to the Netherlands, and I'm so thankful that we get to do that.
I think it's a wonderful thing that you have kids. Forget taking them, and although that's a lovely privilege, I think that it's a beautiful thing that you have chosen to do together with your husband, that to be parents. So to you, it looks wild. Some of the experiences that I have, it's just part of my life as a baseline. And I also would say, I just think it's great. You made people right inside yourself, and then you get to sew for them, and you get to educate them and take them to CD Saturday or whatever. And then also take them to Netherlands and take them to Italy and things like that. it's a big job, and parenting is a big job. That's why Mother's Day and Father's Day are holidays. So I'm happy for you that you have that. And I guess on the other side, some people might say, well, Shams, you have a big privilege too. When you go someplace, yeah, you can go spend 2 months in Tanzania and then meet up with your husband and say, okay, we're going to spend a week or so in Europe. That's a lot of privilege as well. I think anybody that's traveling would be in the top income group on the planet.
Yeah.
I think we have lots of privileges between the two of us.
Absolutely. And it's been a privilege to speak to you again.
Thank you so much. I always enjoy our chats. And for the listeners, thank you for spending this time with us. And we hope to have some more episodes where we talk together. We've already got some ideas that I'm just so excited about your project of helping people to sow sustainably. And even though you don't spend as much time talking about it, Me Made May is coming up. And that's another one of your projects to help people reduce their waste and reduce their impact on the planet, even in some small way. So I'm always happy to support your activities. Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you so much, Jams. I cannot wait for more of these conversations. Hopefully again later this year. Thank you so much.
God willing. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!